Okay, welcome back, guys. We've got our next clinic here lined up, ready to go. Some say our next guest could be closely related to Ned Kelly. He's a straight shooter from Outback Australia, well known around our model train shows for having a good chin wag. Here to share how he went from a narrow minded Australian narrow gauge modeler to an outstanding Queensland Rail manufacturer. Straight off his bike to you is none other than Adam Wuiske. Take it away, Adam.
G'day all, how you going? Cheers heaps for that, Brad. I really enjoyed all of those lies. They didn't even cost me, so that's good. I like that. So yeah, as Brad mentioned, yep, I'm basically bush class bikey scum, I suppose you'd call me. So effectively, I was asked to do this talk on how I got roped into becoming a manufacturer because yeah, it wasn't intentional. I've been to model trains ever since I was about that big, and basically just sort of gone from there. So let's get into it. So how I model railway manufacturer. Now, the working title for this, of course, is a rambling guided tour of the River Styx, including scenic hotspots, fine dining locations, and vantage points. Effectively, the company I own, Wuiske Models, we started back in September 2002 by accident. So there's my ugly mug there, models we produced. And so, rightio. Effectively, we started as a complete accident. I'm an architectural model maker by trade. So, you know, used to make boring blocks of units and ships and all sorts of things. And I was approached by a gentleman named Bert Kingston, whom those of you who are familiar with the motorcycle racing world would know him from, he was the world champion in speedway racing back in the 60s and early 70s. And he approached me to make some models of a little butter wagon for him. And I took a trip out to the Workshops Rail Museum at Ipswich, just west of Brisbane, to try and get some photographs of the prototype so I could model it. And that was all fine. As soon as I asked the people at the gate where the butter wagon was located these days, and they found out I was trying to make models, they bribed me with coffee and pulled me aside to bend my ear and have a chin wag and started asking me if I could make models for them. So effectively what happened was that I was left in a position where the amount of models needed was far and away more than I could make when everything was being made from scratch. So what we did was we approached quite a few different local manufacturers with interesting reactions. And we went from there, and in the end we approached one, which was Rusty Smith, formerly of Hanover Model Casting. And he turned around and said, mate, I'll supply you, but if you're interested, do you want to buy the business? And at the time he had some Queensland stuff and some New South Wales stuff, about 100 kits in all. And I flat out just said, well, I'm not interested in that New South Wales garbage because I don't know anything about it. I'm not passionate about it. And I'll effectively can't do it anything except a disservice. So I sort of got roped into the Queensland side, and it went from there. So what we took over Rusty from Hanover was around 100 polyurethane kits of locomotives, wagons, coaches, buildings, four-wheel wagons, detail parts, lots of things, all of which were handmade patterns. Now, I should point out that the Queensland market, when we started, consisted of 48 modelers. On the planet, I had all of them's name, address, and telephone number. So it was a really booming market, you know. Effectively, what happened was that because Queensland Rail is narrow gauge, we run 3'6", and we run the largest narrow gauge network on the planet, with some of the biggest trains in the world. But that's a story. So when we're modeling, we run with HO scale. We run HON 3.5 or HON 42, as some people call it, or the Europeans call it HOM. But it's basically the old TT gauge. 12 millimeters is the track gauge. So effectively, where it was at when we started was there was a very limited availability of basic things like axles. Your bogies had to be made. So effectively what you used to do, we used to make a little spacer out of polyurethane, which was a new bolster. And so you'd have to cut the old bolster out in standard HO gauge and glue the new ones in, which was a bit, how's your father, shall we say? So effect happened was it was supposed to be a part-time business. It just never was, just because the minute we took it over, the phone started ringing and it didn't stop, and well, it hasn't stopped for ages. So we effectively just kept working and working and working and didn't sleep. So, that's a couple of the kits we did, a very small selection, and away we went from there. So we got to a stage where we had about 330, I think it was, products. And it was at a stage, business was kind of stable. We were never going to make a mint out of it, but you get that. It was just something that, it was an honest living. It was something we enjoyed doing. It was something I was passionate about. And it was something that, it was just a nice sort of casual, if not cheap lifestyle. So basically, in the end, we got to a stage where the business got to a point where if I was personally casting the items, there was not enough hours in the day for me to keep up with the orders, particularly the wholesale side of it with the shops. So we outsourced the casting to a lovely bloke in New Zealand and passed away about 6 months ago. And then we ended up that we got to a stage where we started playing around with this newfangled system called rapid prototyping. This was not the sort of fancy your home-based machines that you can get now, like your FDM machines and all of that. These were the early forms of SLA printers that you could buy, and they usually had a starting price in Australian dollars of 300,000. So they weren't exactly cheap nor pocket-sized. But from that, what we found was that we could sit down and lock ourselves away and ignore the phone and carrier pigeons and all of that, and produce a drawing from scratch within sort of around about a week to 2 weeks, have a pattern or a master come back within another fortnight. And so within a month of deciding, hey, let's give this a go, we'd have something that we could work on. And in a few weeks of that, we could release it as a kit. So it really opened us up to, we could produce more things. And once we really started growing the number of products we made, the market started to steadily grow. We pushed ourselves through anybody who looked even remotely like a shop. So, it was one of those that we figured the more we could promote it and the more we could get it out there, particularly within Queensland, that the more it would grow. And so therefore it would mean the more we could produce. So that was the idea. But the one thing we loved about the rapid prototyping was when you're hand making patterns, there's only so far you can with your little eyeballs, but with rapid prototyping you can zoom in infinitely. So doing things that are 0.1 of a millimeter and all of that is not a great hassle. You can actually have. So these are a couple of the things, just as an example of what we did. I mean, these are just screenshots from AutoCAD. Up in the top left there, that's always 1502 class. There was 3 different classes that QR had that were basically similar. And that was one of our more popular kits that we, and then the one on the right is a Queensland Railways A-class wagon, which these date back in some form to around 1865, and different editions of them lasted right up until about 1989. So they got a fair old run out of them, because in Queensland we never like to throw anything away. So, and again, I mean, the top photo there that's from Arthur Hayes. That's a photo of on the left is the DF open wagon, and on the right is a standard single door F wagon. And these are 4-wheel wagons that we would produce with rapid prototype patterns. The sole bars, or the sides where the axle boxes are mounted to, that was actually done using low pressure injection molding, which was something that we played around and experimented with, just because the Queensland market is such that at the time there wasn't enough finances in the industry to justify spending $10,000 on making a high pressure injection molded tool. But you could $1,000 to make a low pressure one and hopefully get the right detail out of it. So that's the sort of thing we could produce, and we could pump those out en masse, which reduced the cost. We could sell the kit a lot cheaper, and I get a lot more of them out there. And in the end, I think we ended up with about 25 4-wheel wagon kits. So On the bottom there, close up showing some detail. That's part of a Rhodesian Railways, it was Zimbabwe now, 33 class, which we were commissioned to do for a bloke over in Africa, and just showing some of the detail. So if you look on the exhaust there, those little vents on the exhaust, they're actually 0.15 meter across. So the beautiful part about rapid prototyping with these unbelievably expensive machines was that the resolution you could get was just, and using silicon rubber molds to reproduce them on a commercial scale, using the right rubbers and the right resins and things like that, you could actually produce unbelievable detail. I mean, if you weren't careful, some of these things would even reproduce a fingerprint. So yeah, Masters was one of those things that was never handled. So in 2010, we took a gamble on producing our first steam loco kit. There'd been a few steam locomotive kits produced for the Queensland market, with mixed success rates. From a dollar perspective, they were never really massively successful, but it was sort of enough that would just, the people who produced them would say, oh, we'll produce another one and see what happens. But it was never something that was really going to take off as a long-term venture. We decided that we would give it a go. Now, to ensure that we had minimal problems, we decided to go with DJH in England, which was a blessing and a curse. A curse due to the fact that very expensive, and a blessing in the fact that at the end of the day, anything we didn't know what we were doing with for us steam locomotive kit, DJH could pick us up and guide us along with that. So it just sort of limited the chances of it being a complete stuff up. So, and yes, I developed a very healthy hatred for engineers. I've always hated engineers, being an architectural model maker. Architects and engineers are my favorite people on the planet. I look forward to the day we can hunt and kill them for sport. But that aside, yeah, it was interesting because the locomotive we produced was somewhat small. So as I've said there, even their shoelaces annoyed me, which is about right. But after 10 months of work, swearing, hair pulling by zero, sacrificing tennis balls and sleepless nights, we released the A10 kit. And that's the A10 there. Now, this is the type of locomotive that Queensland Railways ever had. They were built in Glasgow in 1865. And there's still two of them around today. One is running, technically, and it was the oldest continuously running steam locomotive in the Southern Hemisphere. So now to give you an idea of that locomotive and its stuff is about 3 14/16, so 3 7/8 inches long over buffers. It's very, very small. The motor, 8mm diameter motor, and it's driven on the rear set of drive wheels. So very small locomotive, not overly complex in details, but an absolute nightmare to get it to run right, just because balancing it and everything else. So effectively, it's kind of, it's the equivalent of taking your driving test by entering in a Formula One race. You know, it's sort of one of those things. It was probably not the best thing to start with, but we had a go. We did it. And so, yeah, we did a run of those. They sold out, and we might look at revisiting them one day, but at this point, no. And DJH has basically wound down a lot of their operations. So in 2002, we partnered up with Kieran Haskell of Haskell Co. Now, for those who haven't heard of Haskell Co., he's in Taiwan, in Kaohsiung in the south of Taiwan. He's a mad Aussie, former West Australian, who lives there, and he's completely insane, much like ourselves. So we get along quite well. We fight quite well, but we work well together. And basically, he's the Bachmann agent for Taiwan. He has done a lot of work with Frateschi, with Bachmann themselves, Bachmann China, and he does his own products over there for the Taiwan market. And he's also been involved in half a dozen or more brass models for the Australian O-scale market in both New South Wales and Victoria. And he approached us after we did the A10 and said, hey, I like that. I think you're a bit insane. Do you want to do some stuff together? And it kind of went from there. So rightio, we would talk at great length. This is one of Kieran's models, the CPH from New South Wales. This thing here is, there was only, I think, 100 of these, and they sold out within a very short space of time. It's an insane model. I mean, I personally, I'm not an expert or a fan of New South Wales stuff and all this other standard gauge thing. It's just weirdly fat track to me. But basically, what it is these models, they have a truss. So if you picture like a Warren truss bridge, picture that underneath it, and drive shafts running from the center of the unit to each bogie, just like the prototype. It's an insane level of detail, and it's one of those things you can do in O scale. So yeah, just stunning model. So basically, between Kieran and myself, we produced the first ever mass-produced ready-to-run wagons for Queensland Railways. The first two were the QLX, which is what's on the screen now, the most common louvered van. And we also did the QSC, which is on the next screen, which is the same body, but with a curtain side. It's a taut liner body. Now, we produced these. It was one hell of a gamble. It was very expensive. And it's one of those things that, you know, as a customer or a modeler, we tend to look at our models and we think, oh, wow, these are great. And detail, I love this, and I love all these little bolt heads and all of that. Well, allow me to tell you, as a manufacturer, when you're doing the first one ever for the market and you have no idea if it's going to work, when you're paying that final bill and you're doing the transfer online, looking at that bill and seeing that it's actually more than what you owe on your house, I don't care how good the model is, it's just a toy. When it comes out that particular minute, it's just a toy. But we did it. They were very well received. People loved them. We sold out of the first run. The second run very nearly sold out. And the same goes with the QSC taut liners. The second run of those is nearly sold out, and they've been very well received by the public, and the market has really grown as a result. So we did those, and then after that, due to insanity and lack of sleep and lack of knowledge, we actually produced this from the minute where I said to Kieran, hey, what do you reckon we do a wagon? To the day we released was 3.5 months. It was 3 months and 11 days from the day we started until the day we released, which apparently is a record that no one else has done. And yeah, there's very good reasons why no one else did, because yeah, that was 3 and a bit months of no sleep. But we did it. It's a feather in our cap, I suppose you'd call it. But we've done it. The market is growing. So effectively, straight after that, we released the KOJX cattle wagons. Queensland is the only state that's still sent by rail, and it's one of those very iconic things. These wagons are actually the same underframe as the QLX and QSC. So it was a bit of a note to produce them, because all we had to do was make a new mold for the actual cattle container, which is a 40-foot container. So as well as that, I released the OLO tank wagons, which were made in conjunction with Steve and Andreas at SDS Models. So again, they sold out very quickly, and we were there. But the KOJX cattle wagons are also on their second run. So in all, we released 4 ready-to-run wagons within 7 months. Again, this is a first. And, well, I can say honestly, now we know why it's a first. It was insane, but we did it. So, yeah. In 2020, released the 1550 class locomotive. So this was the first ever mass-produced ready-to-run loco for the Queensland market. So that's the 1550s there. Now, we did them with Queensland Rail. They have multiple liveries and versions. So the above livery in the blue there, that's the original livery, modified nose, hence the D means driver only on the running number there, which was a modification they did in the early 90s. And then on the bottom right, that's what they call the corporate. sometimes called Broncos after our local football team. The image on the bottom left, if you look at that, what that is every manufacturer would be familiar with these. That's your Tampo print sheet, so, or your color sheet. What that has is a list of every single color, and if they're using masks, Tampo pads for printing, it lists every single color with the Pantone numbers, which is the global standard for coloring, so that way there can be no confusion when you're producing it between what color goes where and what shade or anything like that. So just the design side of it, which I did myself, took about months for the 1550s, and just the coloring for getting that bottom left image, that in itself took about another month and a half. So there's a fair bit that goes into these things that most people don't see. It's not quite as easy as just, here's some money, make this for us. So pretty much straight after that, within a few months, we released the 2400 class, which was effectively a 1550, just at full modification. And yeah, so that's it there in the corporate livery, but that's got the original high nose. So, and then with that, we also did the bicentennial. Back in 1988, for the bicentenary of Australia, Queensland Rail painted 3 locomotives, one of the 2400 class, one of the 1720 class we've also done, and one of the big 3100 class electric locos that run up in central Queensland on the coal trains, were painted in this rather interesting livery to sell bicentenary of Australia. So we released this one. We only made 100 of them, and they actually sold out in 3.5 hours. It was just under a day. So basically straight after that, we turned around. Effectively what we've done is we've just worked non-stop. So our attitude is that we'd rather build the market and build more and more models, and effectively, hopefully, fingers crossed, touch wood, everything allowing, we might make a profit. Our attitude is we plow everything back into the business so that we can grow it. Now, with the 1550s, by the time we released the 24s, we've already done the artwork for the 1720s, which is these ones here. Now, in the top there, the artwork you can see, that was the design that we did here in-house. You see the artwork that you quite often see in magazines and things. What a lot of people don't know is all the weird and wonderful colours. Basically, every colour is a different component. So sometimes you'll see where there's groups of colours, and that indicates all the parts from a specific mould. So that's basically just a quick explanation of how it all works. But here you can see photos of them in production. So as you can see, there's multiple versions, and all of that as per usual. So, but this is how it works. And then once we'd gotten those out, within about another 4 months, we released the 2100 and then eventually the 2470 class, which is very similar to the 1550s and 24s we'd done earlier on. So basically got us up to that point where we decided, right, we've got that in control. Let's have a go at something a bit more fun. So Bridget, my darling and long suffering wife, and I decided effectively we'd give this manufacturing joke a go here in Australia, which, yeah, why not? How hard can that be? So we started into it, and it's something we've been talking about for years. With the variations in the US dollar, with the variations of the political systems and else, it makes it very hard to actually work out what something's going to cost you. Between today and tomorrow, it could change quite dramatically. So we always thought, well, why can't we do this here in Australia? And so we took our first steps at having a crack at that. And thus far, it's all sort of ticking along. So it turned out, though, that it could be diabolically hard. So, yeah. But as always, we decided to stick with it. And this is a snapshot of the first test shots of one of our first product that we produced here in Australia. So the tooling design was done here in this house. And then we are going over to China. So the molds we get made in China simply because you can't get anyone in Australia to do them. Effectively, in Australia, we are, if you want to get an ice cream tub, green container, or a flower pot made, no problems. But anything smaller or more intricate, you're stuffed. So basically, we had to go to China for that, and then we bring back to Australia and we get them injected with plastic locally. So this mold here, that's for our brake rigging tool, which I'll show you in a minute. So all up, there's about 303, I think it is, if I remember correctly, pieces in that mold, and that produces one sprue that's about 6 inches by 3 inches. So yeah, and that mold is about 18 inches cube, and it weighs about 350 pounds. So that's the mold, and that's what you just saw the draw. That's the sprue that comes out of it in black, and that's what they call the cavity in the mold. So that particular part is called the slide, and what you'll find is that you'll see that there's a big hole in the center of it. That's the injection port. Okay, so the tool post will slide into that, and the plastic will be squirted through the center. It's usually clamped at about 250 tons of pressure, and the plastic is injected at about 225 ton. And the plastic is always injected at a slightly pressure than the clamping, so that otherwise you end up, it tries to split the mold, and that will give you flashing between the parts, okay, and also thicken them up. These parts are incredibly small. If you look, I can find my cursor, it's there. Okay, these are what they call door bangs. Our open wagons, or gondolas as you call them in the States, have drop-down doors that open on the sides. And so to avoid a shunter dropping those doors open, bashing out the axle boxes or the brake rigging or anything else, they have these little metal stirrups that hang down, and they're 0.6 meter wide and 0.3 of a millimeter thick. So effectively, they're a very, very small item. They've got two little bolt heads on them, which you can't really see there, but they are there. But they come up nicely once they're painted. So then, of course, there's the brake rigging, and you've got the handbrake lever right here. So things of that nature. So this is the HJS when it's built. That's the open wagon. So right here, you can see these door bangs I was mentioning. Okay, and then that's the 3D artwork that we did to design the mold. And again, it's the same as what you saw on the 1720. Every color is a different piece. So this here is the first produced, ready-to-run wagon to be made in Australia since the 1970s. So it was a very big gamble. It was a lot of work. A lot of very, very sleepless and terrified nights, but we got there. And you know, I mean, the orange component you can see in the middle here, that's the metal. We have those made down on the Gold Coast, which is about 4 hours from us. You know, the actual plastic is shot down in Brisbane, about 3 hours from us. Yeah, we try and get everything done in Australia just on principle, really. And mostly because every bugger out there said we couldn't do it. So yeah, we got to the point where there it is in their pretty little boxes, and even the foam inserts came from Brisbane. So yeah. So as I said, it was mass-produced, ready-to-run model trains ever produced in this country for the last 50 years, or nearly 50 years. So straight after that, we thought, okay, well, we've done it. Let's try something a bit harder. So we thought we'll have a go at another cattle wagon. So these here are the KSAs. They're an earlier wagon. They're only 32 foot long, which is standard length from the 1890s through to about 1950 for Queensland wagons. They're a steel framed wagon with timber floorboards and slats along the side. And cattle wagons always had timber slats for years, purely and simply because cattle would kick them out. And it was very cheap and easy to replace them. So with steel, you had to make sure there were no burrs for the beast to catch itself on, whereas with timber, you had no problems. It was just easier. So these were our second mass-produced wagon we produced. The assembly of them was pretty much the same as the HJS, but what we did with every product we're producing here, excuse me, we're trying to increase the complexity of it for ourselves and our guys. And what we did was we played around with Tampo printing, which again had not been done in this country for model trains since the early 1970s, and was last done by Hornby when they used to have a factory here. So that was an interesting exercise, but we did it. A lot of very, very steep learning about inks and different viscosities and everything else. And effectively what you can see in the bottom right is that's the line down in Dalby, which is about 50 kilometres south of us. And so that means it's 50 kilometres closer to being away from the middle of nowhere. Something along those lines. I'm not exactly sure geographically, but it's somewhere there. And so the boy, you can see is the black printing on the blackboards there. And if you look at the photo on the bottom left, you'll see that what we've got is we've got a blackboards, and then you've got a whiteboard next to it. Now, the two blackboards are done with a rubber pad, and then the white is done at the same time as the white lettering. Now, the way it works, and then the spot comes after. So the way it works is you have what's called a cliche. It's basically a piece of 0.25 millimeter stainless steel that's highly polished. That gets etched to a depth of about 5 microns. And so we draw our artwork for the lettering, and it gets etched into the stainless steel. And then you have a ring around an ink pot. And if you're familiar with screen printing, it's kind of an inverse version of that, where the ink pot will slide over the impression, the etched surface, and then it will slide back, and the little ring around it will remove all the excess ink, and just leave what's been deposited in the ink or the cliche. And then after that, a pneumatically powered rubber pad will press down on it at about 80 psi, and then it will pick up, move forward, and then down on the model. And then the model just sits on a jig that we make up, but it's nice and handy so that the boys can just put it on, take it off. And the difference between this and, for instance, is that decaling for this, you'd have 3 different decals that we'd need to apply. We could go multicolor, but we'd have 3 separate decals. So that'd probably about, at best, 2 minutes each side. So 4 minutes per wagon and everything else. Where, excuse me, the biggest thing we wanted to demonstrate was that we could product here for the exact same price as what we can do it in China, which might have been slightly insane looking back on it, but we've done it and continue to do it. So what's actually happened there by doing the printing, the last time I looked at the screen on the machine, I think one of the boys who was doing the printing was up to 80 prints per hour. So it's a little bit quicker. And so that's the beauty of this system. The downside is that it's a 20,000 machine and all of that. So, and then because it's 2020, someone left the tap running. So with where we live, we basically get no rain for about 11 months, and then we get about 5 years worth of rain in a couple of hours. So yeah, now that's actually that photos take probably 100 feet behind me over this way, and that came right in downstairs where we had the office and the shop and everything else and all of our warehouse, and that came in through there, and that was just lovely. So to get up to that height, the water had to rise 8 feet, which it did in 15 minutes, which that was interesting. But effectively, we got over that. And so, yeah, our factory is no longer here. We don't have production. We've outsourced that to Dalby, and we're actually in the process of building something a little bit bigger and better to continue as a full-on model train factory out here on the Darling Downs in Queensland. So effectively, there's a lot of new things we're working on. There's a lot more bogie to produce. We've got doors and windows that we've announced very recently. They should be getting released in the next couple of weeks. Australian-made paint starter sets just to try and get people into QR without busting the bank. You know, the grey thing over on the right there, you can see that's a Queensland cement bin. that they ran around for about 4 years on our system on a multitude of different wagons. And so, yeah, there's all up, I think we've got about 25 projects in the works right now. But we've got, touch wood, we'll have between 2 and 3 new wagons that are produced here in Queensland being released this year. And then another 2 to 3 are following that next year. But there's always plenty going on here. We're always sort of snowed under with everything, but that's all right. So we just keep plodding along, trying to make the best models we can. And as I've said, if we can do it here, we will. So, but as I always say, is we shall see how we go. So I'll hand it back to Brad, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask.
Right, thanks, Adam. Great insight to how you do your manufacturing. I've got one quick question. As you know, I'm a keen HO modeler, a normal modeler, and I've got one of your narrow gauge things in a bucket of warm water down here, and it's not growing to fit onto the layout. Can you tell me what I'm doing wrong?
Mate, the problem there is that it sounds like you're going for what some people, you know, maybe they've had a head trauma, maybe it's a mental disability thing, but they do refer to it as standard gauge. I mean, I don't know where it comes from. Up here in Queensland, we tend to call that fat gauge. And then, of course, if you're like Marty and you do Victorians or broad gauge, we tend to call that obese gauge. So, you know, it's if you keep it in water, mate, look, it'll keep growing. But I have been told from an unreliable source who had a genuine certificate of some sort of accreditation that was sponsored by Kellogg's, that narrow gauge is actually the best model. It does actually increase your libido. It decreases taxation, increases property value. It's just fantastic.
It's great. Now on to some serious questions. I see our sandpaper salesman's joined us here out of the blue. And
G'day, young Gordy. How are you, mate?
I'm very well. Let me just provide a bit of advertising there for Cricket Australia while I join you all this morning or this evening in Australia. So there's been lots of questions, Adam, in the chat. I was just turning my camera off. There's been lots of questions in the chat about we'll just transition the advert off for now. Lots of questions about has the current pandemic affected your manufacturing or sales during this period that you can divulge to us?
Yeah, of course. Not really. Effectively, it hasn't as such. Sales haven't really been affected. They've just changed a bit, which is fine. So that, you know, I mean, every man and their dog's got a bit more time than everything else. So let's be honest, you've got two options. You can either go to the pub, except they're closed, or you can go and spend time with that strange creature we all call the wife. You can go to the layout room. So the layout room it is. So we've all got time on our hands. So let's get some models done. Seems to be the attitude. So far as the manufacturing side of it, this is one of the advantages we've got with doing the manufacturing in-house and doing it here and having our guys literally half an hour's drive from us, is that it's all nice and close. So we're not really affected by much out here. But I know that within the industry and within China itself, there's a lot of problems. I know that there's at least 3 or 4 tooling makers, as in mold manufacturers, that have gone bankrupt. There's a lot of shipping. Shipping is insane at the moment. You could either, something that could take 2 weeks to get to you previously, at the moment could be on your doorstep in 4 hours or within 24 months. Nobody knows. It's literally just luck of the draw. So shipping is one of those really insane things at the moment. There is a lot of financial problems going on for not so much the manufacturers, but the guys before all of that who do the tooling design and that. So it's really hit them hard.
And so if people outside of Australia wanted to get a hold of your models and maybe you've inspired them to start modeling things that fall off the track. I mean, narrow gauge. If you've inspired them to model narrow gauge, and in particular, have a model of a kangaroo, which I'm sure our friends at miniprints.ca, our NMRAX sponsors and NMRA partners, could provide you with a 3D printed kangaroo. How can people get hold of your models if they're outside of Australia?
Easy. First of all, if you're outside of Australia and you do wish to get hold of our models, that's just fantastic. As I said, decreasing taxation, increasing property values, all of that. It's important things to remember at these times. Basically, just go to our website at www.wuiskemodels.com. I'll ask one of these lovely chaps, he said knowingly, to put it on their page or something along those lines, because that's just stuff that I just can't do. But there is a full online shopping cart, so yeah, there's no problems. We've got a few hundred customers outside here, and it's no hassle.
So do you see yourselves as a manufacturer? You literally do HO scale. I know that you do standard gauge and narrow gauge stuff for people that want to run 16.5 narrow gauge stuff on 16.5 mil wide track, which is a bit mental. But anyway, do you see yourselves expanding into other scales, or because there's a lot of narrow gauge modelers in the North America that model O scale? Do you see yourselves expanding into different scales?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I mean, the O scale market is something that I've actually looked at a little bit. We're one of the only companies in Australia that doesn't pre-sell our models or do pre-orders and all of that. I don't believe in it. Nothing against the other companies that do, but so far as my thoughts, it's theft. I don't like it. I don't agree with it. Right? That's just me. I'm very old-fashioned and stupid. So when we made the QLXs and other things like that, you're talking 5 to 6 figure bills for doing that. So, to earn the money to do it and everything, I spent most of my time sitting on CAD patterns and masters for most of the kit manufacturers in this country and a few others. And most of those were in O scale. So it was quite interesting for me to look just what sort of interest there is in it. And I can't see us getting into other scales within the next sort of decade. But who knows? I mean, there's just, and the only reason I say the next decade is there's just too many things we've got on the books that we want to do, both personally and as a business. So that's the only thing. But eventually, yeah, I'd like to.
So without giving away any IP, what do you see as being the next big leap forward in model railroading manufacturing? As in the next big thing that everybody's going to have as part of their ready-to-run models?
Realistically, that's hard to say. I mean, I think that the thing that people are going to have as part of their model over the next decade, I think, without any shadow of doubt, is going to be rapid prototypers and 3D printers. I mean, just due to the whole cluster manufacturing within China and everything else, the prices are through the floor. I mean, we bought one of those Anycubic photons. We actually bought two of them, just because when they came out, I looked at it and I thought, bugger, mate, it can't be that good. So I thought, stuff it, let's buy it and have a go. And we bought it. Now, the quality of prints coming out on it, on a machine that has now been far surpassed by other machines, that's a machine I can go onto eBay or anywhere right now and buy for $300, which is nothing. The quality coming out of it is as good as the products I was paying $1,000 for a patent for 10 years ago on a $300,000 machine. It's insane. And you can do that with a machine. You can hop on the internet right now and have it on your doorstep in 48 hours. And that honestly blows my mind. So where the hobby's going to go, it's going to go further and further along those lines. And the only thing that's really lacking in that is the average person having the skill to do 3D drawings, which even that's changing. Now you've got Tinkercad and all of these, and SketchUp and all of these other 3D software programs that you can get for next to nothing or free. And they will get you, okay, they're not quite up there with AutoCAD or SolidWorks or something like that, but by God, they're close. And, you know, more than sufficient for what we as average modelers will ever use. And, you know, the more people practice and all of that, there's some insane models being made on free software and then dumped out on a $300 printer. It honestly blows my mind.
Well, Craig Mackey has asked a question that's very relevant to this, because I've noticed that when things come off a 3D printer, they need cleaning up. So he asks, do you use sandpaper on your models when they come out of the 3D printer?
Now, Craig asked that question completely independently, did he, Gordy?
He asked the question, that is the question. Do you use sandpaper at all on your models? Gordy wants to know. Nothing to do with Gordy.
No. No, well, effectively, we on the early prints we used needed cleaning up, like the ones we got on these $300,000 machines. You'd have to actually sit there and hand polish them and clean them up so that they were ready for casting. The stuff that's coming out on them now, that, as I said, cost nothing, they don't need any real cleanup. And if they do, try reorient the machine. And yeah, it's insane how good the stuff is.
Oops. So that's cool. So I have one little win to announce to everyone. I need to just change my background for this, just to put something a little bit appropriate up as England win the Ashes there. But I have to tell you all that Mini Prints have said they will do kangaroos and they're working on it today. And Craig has asked them to do wombats, koalas. For anyone outside of Australia, that's a drop bear, not a koala. Snakes, crows, and something else. So that's all really cool. I think that's great. So kind of, I had one more question. I'm just going to get rid of England before Martin kicks me out the room. So I have one more question for you, and that is, recently in the world and in the hobby, we've seen a significant amount of digital transformation. You've mentioned a lot about rapid prototyping, people doing models at home, having more access to 3D printers, which the skill level becomes more on the electronic side and the CAD drawing side than it does potentially on what you could have never probably been able to make as quickly in the past, even if a print takes 12 hours to print. But how do you see the recent digital transformation? Of course, you now speaking to the whole world about your models and stuff. How do you see that impacting the hobby? What are your thoughts as the manufacturer?
I think from a manufacturer's perspective, I think, to be honest, that there's some manufacturers, no one's going to like this comment, but anyway, there's some manufacturers that I think will be severely hurt by it, and probably some that'll fall off the perch as a result. But at the end of the day, if we chose to be in this industry, and if we're not smart enough or whatever to keep up with it and keep abreast of it and listen to our customers, then what are we doing in it? Right? It's something that at the end of the day, I see that the change that's happening with the digital side, I think, is brilliant. You know, the same as I think that this side here with the web streaming and all that, I also think is brilliant. It's another thing for growing the hobby. The days of traditional modeling are still well and truly there. There's a lot of people that say, oh no, it's all going 3D and all that garbage. But I think that the two can run together concurrently and quite harmoniously. And some of the stuff that I've seen is insane. It is simply mind-boggling, some of the stuff that's being produced now, both by hand and by 3D. And it will impact the industry. But so what? So did DCC, so did going to rail. You know, all of these things impact the industry. It's our job to just move along with it.
Cool. I think that's pretty much all the questions that were there that I saw. Was there any questions on YouTube? No? Okay, cool. So for kind of final question, Adam, is that you have a lovely wife, Bridget, who supports you and is all over your website. She's always doing things, whether that's threatening you with an axe or helping you at a model train show. Do you think that being a model train manufacturer is a good way of persuading somebody to move to where there's loads of snakes and stuff? Do you think everyone should get into manufacturing?
No. What I've found is being a really ugly, dopey bloke with a stupid mustache and an even dopier ponytail, that seems to be the one thing. The fact that she's just as insane as me kind of helps as well. So, yes, my beautiful wife did move from the other side of the planet it was a 25-hour flight, moved to a place where, yes, all of the nasty snakes you see that they have in Australia, yet they're actually here in this town, bar one, I think. And yeah, so effectively within a cooey of this place, you've got all the snakes, all the roos, drop bears are a common, and it's just something that we have to deal with. So
anyway,
but yeah, it's.
So on the last bit, what's the population of Jandowie? For you've talked about Jandowie and in your presentation, and we've got a few people from all around the world. So what'll be the population on a good day?
Last I heard, it used to be about 1,000, but it's now down around 860. And I believe, based on the last census, that's 860 people spread over 6.3 million hectares.
Okay, so it's a fair. There's not many people there. There's a lot of land.
The average block of land, we're in the town, but the average block of land units in any direction of us is between 10 and 100,000 acres.
Cool.
Well, I think that's
a lot of cattle, a lot of snakes.
Adam, we're up on our time, and that was fantastic. Thank you so much for coming, taking part. Our first actual manufacture of things that go on wheels and run on the track. I hope we can get you back because I know you've got loads more to talk about, and I'm sure you can kickstart the worldwide interest in narrow gauge Queensland Rail stuff with our support from Mini Prints to be able to get your HO scale kangaroos and whatever else. But thank you. I think the only thing that's left to do is that Martin needs to get you to spin the wheel of chat.
Yes, we're going to do another wheel of chat, so we'll see what happens here. We'll hit the button and off it goes. And what's the question going to be this time? How long have you been modelling? So all the people in the chat, start putting how many years in you've been modelling. This could be a bit of an eye-opener, and we'll come back later on and see what the answers are, and we'll have our next presenter ready. So thanks a million, Adam.
Not a worry. Thanks heaps, guys. Hope you've enjoyed it and hope you could understand it. Have a good one, eh?
See you, buddy.